How will we power our future? Can we create a healthy and clean economy? Climate One at the Commonwealth Club is at the forefront of the global debate about energy, economy, and the environment. Bringing together the brightest and most provocative leaders of our time, Climate One is the place where big ideas get heard. With thoughtful and insightful discussions on policy, business, science, and culture, Climate One founder Greg Dalton gets to the heart of the matter. It's our future. It's time to come together.
Today, Indian eco-feminist Dr. Vandana Shiva talks about her opposition to industrial agriculture and genetically modified crops. She's called seed patents biopiracy. She also challenges Western thinking that sees nature as something to be conquered. A conversation with a leading defender of the environment. Today on Climate One. During the 1970s, you were active in the grassroots Chipko movement led by women aimed at stopping deforestation in northern India. What drew you to that movement?
Greg, I've grown up in the forests of the Himalaya. I was born in the forests of the Himalaya. My father was a forest conservator. And before leaving for Canada for my PhD in the foundations of quantum theory, I just wanted to carry a bit of my home with me. So I went for a short trek. And this oak forest that I used to walk in had disappeared. And the stream that came from it was a trickle. I was, of course, taking a flight the next day to Canada. So I continued, but while talking waiting on the road for the bus, dhabawala, chaiwala started to talk of how Chipko had started. And now there's hope. And I asked him more, and he knew a little bit about women's action. But I took a pledge in my mind that every vacation I'll come back and I'll meet the people and volunteer for this movement. So that's what I did. Every summer, every winter, I would come back from Canada and volunteered for the Chipko movement. So it's the disappearance of a forest that led me to it. And now while the forests are burning in California, in Canada, I'm thinking of the slogans of the women who never went to school. They defended the oak tree and they sang songs and said, the oak gives us water. The oak leaves become the streams. And they were talking about humus, and they were fighting against monocultures. And the women said these forests are not timber mines. These forests are sources of soil, water, and oxygen. And every day we realize how that is the basis of life. People died during COVID for lack of oxygen. People are dying for lack of water. 1 billion people and more are dying for lack of food. This is exactly the message that women, simple women from the Himalaya were giving. And I say they became my professors of ecology and biodiversity. I did a PhD in Canada, but a non-PhD learning that has lasted me my life from the Chipko University.
So when I want to get back to Chipko, but you said 1 billion people dying from lack of food. That sounds like a bit of an exaggeration. 1 billion people dying?
Oh, 1 billion people are hungry. And given not just undernourished, really denied. If you take the undernourishment figure, there are two sources of undernourishment. One is you don't have access to food. And this is happening also to the farmers who are growing food. Half of the hungry people of the world are agricultural people who are growing rice with chemicals for which they had to borrow money. So when they grow the rice, they have to pay back the agent of the chemical fertilizer and the pesticide and the seed agent. So they grew the rice, but they can't eat it. And when they sell it, it sells for very low. When they buy the same rice, it's 4 times more. This is the polarization of prices that globalization has created. And that means the same farmers who grew the rice starve. The second is the food itself is now nutritionally empty because the soils are depleted of nutrition. And the nutrition in our food comes from 2 sources. The seeds, we are not breeding for nutrition. We are breeding for weight. It's the ultimate Cartesian victory. How big is the apple? How heavy is your soybean? Not how much nutrition is in. That's why I shifted to nutrition per acre. And we can feed 2 times the world if we conserve biodiversity. The third reason why people are hungry, we are not eating food anymore. It's anti-food, this junk food like stuff. So 1 billion people are hungry, but 2 billion are sick because of these food-like substances where the industry is growing and stuffing it down. And the American diet is now being spread. And everywhere you have diabetes, you have cancer, you've got metabolic disorders.
Yeah, sometimes I think about, there's a food industry that gets us sick, and then there's a medical industry that wants to sell us drugs after we get sick from the food that is sold to us. Much of your work has been to promote biodiversity in agriculture, just as you articulated, specifically fighting against corporate patents on seeds and the use of GMOs. You've called seed patents biopiracy. How much of your objections are the technologies themselves versus who controls it, the consolidation of power, so much power in few hands?
The technology and patenting are wedded from birth. So the patenting was the aim. The technology was the means to achieve that aim. The false claim was made that by tweaking one gene or shooting one toxic gene, a Bt toxin, a Roundup Ready, we are the inventors and creators of life. And therefore, we own the seed, this seed, and its 20 generations to come. And these are cases that have gone to the Supreme Court. There's a very famous case of Monsanto versus a farmer in US where they actually ruled that the seed is a self-replicating machine. And even if you didn't buy the seed from Monsanto, you bought the grain in an elevator, it is still intellectual property. But having done my doctorate work on non-separation, having done my doctorate work on potential, I said, but the seed is self-organized autopoiesis in making, billions of years of evolutionary history in it. The farmers have bred these seeds, the qualities of the seed, the true qualities, outside the toxic qualities, the aroma of our basmati, the non-gluten properties of our wheats. These weren't created by Monsanto or genetic engineering. They were bred by the farmers. So why do I call this biopiracy? Because what nature created, you claim as your creation. And GMO in that worldview means God move over, GMO. God move over. Creation is ours. The second is all indigenous people, the minimum we can claim is 10,000 years. 10,000 years we've farmed. We have bred seeds. One grass, Oryza sativa, became 200,000 rice varieties with the brilliance of Indian peasants. Maize, one teosinte, became the thousands of maize varieties in Mexico and in Peru and in the First Nations of America. That brilliance of breeding is denied. And the corporations say, when I shoot a gene, I create a seed. It is so ontologically wrong, but it's also ethically wrong and epistemologically wrong. So when you ask me, what am I critical of? I'm critical of the worldview of arrogance, the worldview that came with colonialism, the mechanistic mindset of the conquering man being the creator of the earth and creator of the wealth that they basically stole. So, there's a way in which in our age, the religion that was the colonizing mission, the first colonization, you got to be a Christian, all those little kids from the indigenous peoples, the First Nations, thrown into boarding schools. Thousands died. The graves are just being found. That was all to make them civilized through Christianity. Mm-hmm. Today's civilizing mission is use the mysterious word technology, but technology is merely a tool. At any point, humanity is brilliant enough to have 5, 10, 20 tools to choose from. That is technological democracy. And the minute you put technology at the level of religion with a capital T in the hands of 5 men, then that's when hubris substitutes democracy.
And one of the biggest seed controversies has been over golden rice, a variety genetically engineered to provide vitamin A. According to the WHO, vitamin A deficiency is responsible for 1 to 2 million deaths a year, plus another 500,000 cases of blindness. This sounds like a pretty good idea to fortify rice with vitamin A.
Well, it would be a good idea, Greg, if there was no other source of vitamin A. One, when you need vitamin A, what do you eat? You eat curcumin. Why is vitamin A the precursor called beta carotene. Carrot is where
Leafy
good vitamin A.
leafy greens, right? But if
Yeah,
it was so
leafy
readily
greens.
available, then people, if it's so readily available, then there wouldn't be such a vitamin A deficiency, right?
So why is there a vitamin A deficiency? Let's go back to the Green Revolution, Norman Borlaug, who took mixed farming with lots of vegetables, lots of greens, lots of pulses, lots of oil seeds, and then said, no, I want to sell my fertilizers, the leftovers of the war, and therefore we must have monocultures. When you have an external input system, you have to have a monoculture.
And those fertilizers based on fossil fuels partly, right?
They're based on fossil fuels. 1 kilogram of urea fertilizer requires 2 liters equivalent of diesel. The same companies made the explosives and ammunition and made the fertilizers. But it's the same buyers. And you talked earlier about some of them make us sick and then others make a profit. It's the same people who make us sick. But coming back to the issue of vitamin A deficiency, so you create monocultures. And what is Roundup? Roundup, as the debates in the Biodiversity Convention used to show, Monsanto would get up and say, we prevent the weeds from stealing the sunshine. Well, the sun is so generous and it grows biodiversity. The beautiful amaranth, which has been made a superweed with Roundup resistant soya and Roundup resistant corn in the fields of America, and now they're using dicamba and more virulent herbicides. What was called weeds are sources of food, are sources of vitamin A. But the second big reason is that when you do so-called high-yielding varieties with chemical fertilizers, first, your high-yielding variety is merely taking more out of the farm, destroying the straw, which would go back to the soil to make the nutrition. You've destroyed the nutrition cycle of the earth. You've destroyed the nutrients in the soil, the zinc, the iron, everything else that makes us healthy. So you're having nutritionally empty food. So you have a monoculture, you have nutritionally empty food. Then you do milling. Industrial milling is a way to take nutrition out. But they're so clever, then they sell the bran as a separate product. They sell rice bran oil as another product. So they dismember a product which you would eat in wholesome ways. So it's a dysfunctional system to make more and more money for a few people. And we have watched how to dump GMO soya on India. The industry just ganged up and banned our edible oils. They banned our local cold press virgin mills, 5 million just made illegal overnight. And it's the women who came to me and said, bring back our mustard. We cannot eat food cooked in GMO soya. And we had to do a satyagraha. Satyagraha is Gandhi's word of non-cooperation. Satya, truth, agrah, force. He taught us how to throw the British out.
So I certainly see that capitalism is about creating revenue streams, and intellectual property helps lock up technology that secures revenue streams and therefore profits for the capitalistic system. But the systems you're describing are so entrenched and complex. How do we change them? Some people would say organics are more nutritious and counter many of the things you're talking about. Others would say organics require too much land, that organics cannot scale and feed the world.
So, there was the word when Europe was the center of the world, we used to talk about the Eurocentric worldview. And I think now that the US thinks it's the center of the world, there's a very American-centric worldview. But most of the farms of the world are not like what has been made of the American farmlands. Agribusiness has destroyed farming in America. Small farms produce more, biodiversity produces more because it works in cooperation. So the more you intensify chemicals, you intensify commodity production, which doesn't feed you. But the more you intensify biodiversity, the more you intensify the flows of nutrition in a system, the soil regenerates, the plants regenerate, the pollinators come back, and you actually have more nutrition per acre rather than yield per acre. So this debate that's been created, oh, you'll need more land, is a false debate. It's chemical farming that needs more land. It's commodity farming that needs more land. Otherwise, why would the soya lobby had invaded into the Amazon just to grow GMO soya, most of it for animal feed and biofuel? The expansionism of GMO soya should tell anyone that this is not about feeding the world, but it is feeding profits.
India is now the world's third largest emitter of carbon dioxide after the US and China. Granted, India is still living in the shadow of colonialism. There's also a rising middle class in India and China that is aspiring to, higher levels of consumption, material comforts. What responsibility does India have to, with regard to its own emissions?
Well, I think the first thing is we need to remember that while we are politically sovereign, globalization made the economic system one integrated corporate production machine, which outsourced everything at that time to China.
Emissions were
So
exported. Emissions, manufacturing and emissions were exported. Sure. So,
exported. So,
right.
so that is why it's wrong to talk merely about consumers. We got to look at the production system. We got to look at the corporate role. And this is the industrialized countries. If you take their share of production into account, not the geography. And I don't know if you followed Lawrence Summers at the Earth Summit, where he said, "Oh, the third world doesn't have enough pollution, and we must export pollution to them and shift our polluting industry like Jeff Bezos wants to shift polluting industry to other planets." So this idea of exporting toxics, exporting pollution, exporting waste is based on basically a racist divide and apartheid, that you take the sickness. And this is a debate
Sure.
of environmental justice and climate justice all over the world.
Sure, that definitely happened. Exporting manufacturing, exporting the emissions, and there are still rising middle class that have their own domestic emissions, and that is part of it. There's 300 million people who've come out of poverty into the middle class in China. I don't know how many in India, and that is a real force for growing emissions. Most of the historic emissions are red, white, and blue, which means they're French and British and Russian and American, but there is. I'm trying to get to the point of, there's a lot can be blamed on colonialism, a lot can be blamed on exportation and globalization, which may be driven by the forces you cite. But what responsibility do emerging economies have? They have some, don't
So,
they?
yeah, great. So if I have a vegetable vendor outside my door and I just go step out and buy my fresh tomatoes and my fresh cucumbers, and that option is destroyed because Mr. Jeff Bezos comes and shifts everything so that during the lockdown, the vegetable vendor is not able to sell, but Mr. Bezos continues to sell. And these are debates, they're ongoing debates right now
By
on
delivery,
retail.
you can
Yeah,
get the
on
vegetables
retail issue. So when you talk consumption, Greg, it is extremely important to think about forced consumption. Forced consumption in food, it is always forced. The second is, we are a land of clothing. India was colonized for its spices and textiles. But you think changing in the clothing system is not part of the fast fashion industry's big propaganda machine? When, consumers are not little atoms by themselves. They are, when they are made unthinking consumers of advertising signals and options that are closed for them, they will make choices that suit the profits of the corporate world. When they are free citizens who are able to think culturally in their civilization, able to think about the footprint of their actions. That's why I talk about earth democracy. That's why I talk about earth citizenship rather than consumerism. Again, we come back to Mr. Descartes, yeah? We separate consumers from production, but it's one system. We separate corporate profits from the choices consumers make. Why are the young people of the world rebelling? They're seeing the links. The fact that young people are on the streets and striking is they are seeing the links.
Many people, even those with institutional power, feel inadequate. So, what do you say to regular people who think they have no power to affect something so colossal as these systems you're talking about?
Well, I would basically say to ordinary people that the havoc, I've never called it climate change because climate change makes you think in a comfortable way. And now temperature will rise in this way. No, look at the floods in Europe.
Climate disruption, climate chaos. Sure.
I call it climate chaos. From the beginning, when I wrote my book, Soil Not Oil, I called it climate chaos. You don't know where the next extreme event will take place and what its form will be. There is no model, no matter how big your
Yep.
supercomputers be,
We're
they
certainly
cannot catch up.
we're certainly seeing that this summer with floods
Yeah,
and fires.
yeah.
It's
So
devastating.
the three things is, I think all of us should have a deeper understanding that the disruption of the Earth's climate systems comes from not just the use of fossilized material, which the Earth buried over 600 million years, and it should have been left underground, but the way it fossilized our mind. To me, that's the serious question. Yeah, it fossilized our mind to imagine that this is the only way things can work. But once we get out of the fossil carbon idea,
how do we retrain our minds?
we retrain our minds by moving from the mechanistic mind and the monoculture of the mind to the ecological mind and the diversity of the mind. And that is available in the science, it's available in cutting edge science, and it's available in all indigenous cultures. All indigenous culture. And it's available in the will of women to sustain community and the earth in spite of patriarchy. That's why I always say, women will show the way. And if there is a future, it's because women are showing the way. So women, indigenous people, and Gaia herself, the earth, we've got to learn much more, to listen to them, to learn from them. The second is, if you look at the images of Germany, what was happening? The floods came, and if you look at the pictures, where was the worst flooding? Where American-style agriculture has created barren large fields, and a storm, and then the mud, the soil erosion takes place. We're turning the planet into a dust bowl. And when you have extreme rain events, a dust bowl creates floods. When a dust bowl is dry, it creates dust storms. But it creates the kind of floods that we are seeing with mudslides. People were helping each other. So we need much more solidarity. We need much more community building. And third, we need much more multi-layered governance. We need to reclaim the power of community. We need to reclaim the power of the local. We need to reclaim the power of the regional governments. We definitely need to reclaim both the responsibility and the rights of our sovereign governments, who cannot be prevented and should not be prevented from doing the right thing. There's new false solutions coming from global corporations who say only we have the money. Only we have the money, only we can solve the problem. And they just floated this idea of net zero, and Bill Gates has it in his book, Net Zero. And they say it so clearly, we'll continue to pollute. Net zero doesn't mean zero pollution. It doesn't mean we'll end pollution, which is the principle. A polluter should stop polluting and should pay for the damages caused by past pollution. But most importantly, this net zero is, on the one hand, they're saying we won't reduce our pollution. We'll still have our private jets. We'll still fly around. We'll still do global production. And when I want to go into space, I'll still go into space. But you will adjust to be our offsets.
Are you going to adjust? Do you still fly yourself?
Well, we can't fly anyway, but I don't think I wouldn't. I think that time is over. I'm anyway a very senior citizen, Greg. And I think at some point, it's a good moment to make a shift. And I'm talking to you. I'm able to give much more attention to the conservation work, the biodiversity work on Navdanya farm, or to our colleagues. I've just spent a week with our colleagues from across India on how not only will we continue our biodiverse conservation, we'll continue our organic farming, we'll continue building local markets, but we are working with farmers becoming the climate guards, so that the reports on the impact of the damages and the reports on the experience of resilience, which seeds are resilient, with organic practices are resilient, that people emerge from the ground as climate experts. That's our next decade of work.
And speaking of gods, you see environmental destruction as inherently patriarchal. I was a little surprised to see you praise Laudato Si, the encyclical from Pope Francis on care for our common home that urged a move away from consumerism. The Catholic Church is a pinnacle of patriarchy. So, are there powerful white men you think are positive forces on climate and perhaps even have feminine sensibilities?
I mean, I've written so much about the fact that Pope Alexander wrote the papal bull to conquer the lands. The Pope before him wrote the bull to burn 9 million people as witches just because they believed we are part of nature. And, being part of nature was made illegal. You were engaged in witchcraft if you thought you were part of nature. You had to separate yourself. So the burning of witches, colonialism, all goes hand in hand. I do believe very sincerely, and again, I come back to my quantum training, everyone has potential. It's not the fact that you're born white and you're stuck in white superiority. The potential to be Earth citizens is in you. The fact that popes and the church has been part of the crimes against humanity over history doesn't mean a current pope doesn't have a potential to realize that he can correct the church. And the encyclical is a correction. So potential means all of us can be Earth citizens, equal but diverse. All of us can be feminist, men and women. All of us can be indigenous. And that's the major shift we need to make. And if we are able to make that leap from monocultures to diversity, from superiority to equality, from destruction as creation to co-creation in nonviolence, then humanity has a hope.
Podcasts of this and other Climate One shows are available wherever you get your podcast. Talking about climate can be hard and depressing. It can also be exciting and really interesting. So please give us a rating or review on those applications. It really does help advance the climate conversation. Thanks for joining us online. We'll see you next time, everybody.